whenever you are. We're good whenever you are. We're good.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for June 2nd, 2021. Roll call, please.
Budke?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Kuhn? Lunsky?
Here.
Matichek?
Here.
Reichert?
Here.
Sandy? Wasvik?
Here. Looks like we have a quorum.
Yep.
Either roll and item 3-1. Minutes.
3-1.
I did pull the minutes, didn't I? Move approval. Thanks, guys. A lot of love. Okay. Any further discussion on the minutes? Seeing no hands, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Minutes are passed as presented.
May I get the motions on that? Was it Reichert and,
Madam Chair and Reichert.
okay.
Get your mic, Steve. Sorry. We'll get her straight. All right. 3-1.
3-1, public hearing ordinance to amend zoning map rezone to B3 General Business District lots 2 and 4, Block 7 Billiards Edition located at 812 and 820 South 14th Street.
Mrs. Halford.
Hello, good evening. I probably threw you off, Steve, by coming up here a little too soon, so sorry. I'll take the blame for that one. All right, so this item, we're over behind South Washington over here. It's over, oh, can you see my screen? Everyone's good? So South Washington, we're just looking at the rezoning at 820 and 812 along South 14th Street. Nothing has changed from last month. Staff is still recommending approval, and I can certainly answer any questions that you might have tonight.
Okay, any questions before we open the public hearing? Stephanie? Not seeing any, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody in the audience would like to step up and address item 3-1, do so at this time. Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the commission. Mr. Reichert.
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Reichert, second by Mr. Budke. Further discussion? Call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, item 3-1 passes. Item 3-2.
Item -3-2, public hearing ordinance to amend Chapter 8 Land Development Code to include downtown design standards, amending Section 18-0217 B4 Central Business District, Section 18-0311 Downtown Design Review Board, Section 18-0301 signed subsection 8- signage in B4 district, section 18-0312, use of public right-of-way in the B4 district, outdoor seating and parklets.
I won't make her read that again. Miss Edwardson, please.
Sounds good. This is a, thank you, Jane, for that. Final review of the attached ordinance. You saw this last month for preliminary. We had a presentation last month. We don't have a planned presentation tonight, just more of a follow-up to go through maybe some things that changed and then address any questions or comments you might have. Real quickly to discuss what's been changed since preliminary to final is we clarified some comments that were hanging out there on the signage section, clarified some things from small and subdued in nature to actually quantifiable numbers. So the plaque signage established as a number there, addressed window signage because we've had a request that originally proposed 15%, request was closer to 20%, and that seemed to fit appropriately. So 20% of an individual window pane can be covered with window signage under the proposed ordinance. Most window signage comes in the form of being able to see out but not being able to see in, so it should be fine for that. Then also looked at clarifying some different, what illuminated signage means for downtown. Historically, we have preferred fixed mount exterior lit to shine onto a light. That's a more historically appropriate. That makes sense for historical buildings, but maybe not for more modern buildings that we're starting to see with new developments. So with that, there's some examples shown. Bonzer's is the more traditional. Badman's, Ellie's Ivy, Skies is the more new standard that businesses are going to. A cabinet with routed out letters, light shines through it. It's a more modern cabinet. than a straight acrylic cabinet, which there's also an example of what we're going to prohibit. So that signage, outdoor seating clarified, just the timing that they're allowed throughout the year, and cleaned up some language for compliance that was directed to us through the city attorney's office. So with that, those were the changes between preliminary and final. We haven't received any comment from property owners since submitting notices for public hearing, but somebody may be here tonight. So with that, I'd open it up for any questions.
So do we have any questions for Ms. Edmondson at this time? For it? Okay, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody in the audience like to step up and address item 3.2, please do so at this time. I don't see anyone coming forward, so that brings it back to the commission. What say ye? Mr. Reichert?
Move approval.
Mr. Second by Mr. Pike. Mr. Lunsky, did you have a comment, question?
Yeah, I had a question. So if we can only cover 20% of a window with a sign, will that not allow us to hang any signs in the Skyway across Demers in front of the Empire?
That's a great gray area question. The window signage is more pertained to permanent business signage that would be affixed. I would say those event signage that are fixed interior to a window, as most of those are on the Skyway, are temporary. They're usually up only a week or two prior to an event. They're not what we would consider permanent. Even though the vinyl signage that's going on windows is very easy to swap out, it's still considered permanent in the eyes of, it's meant to last longer than a week. So.
Yeah, I guess that's where I got confused, because I know there's lots of businesses, and I know that people print the perforated window covers. They may have their whole front door with an advertisement or something. There's going to be a lot of people, I think, affected by that, or am I wrong on that?
We've addressed temporary signage and that perforated. Temporary would be different. We've made it a little bit easier for folks to do temporary, like sandwich board signs or even temporary window signs. The loophole with the sign code is that if it's hung on the inside of a window, it's not considered signage in the legal terms. And so you can hang stuff on the interior even though it looks outward. It's an interesting loophole that I don't know that staff has ever been able to figure out how to address. It still exists, so we know about it. So to your point, Jamie, I think folks could still print something and hang it on the inside without any enforcement impact.
Okay. Just questioned that, so thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Reichert?
Well, the Skyway, that wouldn't necessarily be a business, that'd be a street or a public access or right-of-way probably, wouldn't it?
It's owned
Private owned.
Is it private?
4th Street, Edgewood, between Edgewood, whatever that complex is called, and the corporate center is a private Skyway that's operated. Yep.
Selkirk.
That one is private as well. I forget that we now have 3.
Yep.
The one that crosses Demers happens to be public owned because the city owns the corporate centers. But if that is ever sold, that would become privately monitored to allow signage on it or not.
And I've never seen them, do we ever get requests for like second-story window advertisements or anything? And do we cover that, or is there a difference?
The signage for design standards regulates like storefront to be between the first and second floors, assuming it's a storefront business. But if you look, like Alaris Center has 3rd or 4th story signage up there. Edgewood has one at the very top of their building, so there's precedent for that. And that would be addressed through permanent wall signage.
No, but if I wanted to cover 20% of my windows all the way up to the 4th floor, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor.
The way this reads is that would be allowed.
okay.
I don't know anybody would do it because the impact would be really hard from the pedestrian scale and even the auto scale, right? Driving by it, it would be really difficult to see, so it doesn't necessarily make common sense to do that, but technically by code you could.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second on the floor. And no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Thank you.
3.3,
Item dash 3-3, public hearing fast track, replat of Lot A, replat of lots 10 and 11, Block 3, industrial subdivision located at 716 South 46th Street.
Ms. Halford?
Good evening again. Just pulling it up. Can we see that okay? Yep. All right. So where we're looking at for this replat is over in the industrial park. And it's actually right here. The building in the GIS is not here, but it actually exists right there. And this replat is basically breaking up that building so it can have different owners. It'll work as a condo agreement, so the shared parking and the shared whatever else they need to share in that, some utilities. And staff is recommending approval, and I can certainly answer any questions. And this is a fast track, so this is the only time you will see it.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Halford before I open the public hearing? Seeing no hands, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody would like to address item 3-4, please do so at this time. Seeing no one, bring it back to the commission. Mr. Reichert.
When they split a building like that, do they have to have then separate electrical, water, heat? I mean, does inspections care about, I mean, I assume if they built them separately, they'd have to have all of that, but when they take an existing building and split it, do they have to?
They'll have their own things, depending on the agreement and what they have in place. They'll either have separate things or they'll work on a condo agreement situation, where some things will be shared.
So I move approval.
Moved. Second by Mr. Johnson. Any further discussion? Call for vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion 3-4 passes.
Item three-
Communications and preliminaries, item 4-1.
Ms. 3-4.
3-4. God, am I off today?
Item
3-4.
3-4,
Help me out here.
public hearing fast track, replat of lots 2 and 4, Block 49, Block F, and vacated 13th Avenue North, Alexander and Ives Addition, located at 1130 North 5th Street.
Mr. Brooks, please.
Thank you. I'll quickly share, so. Not so quickly, apparently. Up here is Gateway Drive. This is Anderson Appraisal, and North End Dairy Queen is just across North 5th Street here. The Horse Trough Park is right on the corner here, and it's in between Anderson Appraisal and then Horse Trough there. The two owners have come to an agreement to split off some of their property, and part of the park is going over to Anderson Appraisal. He wants to extend his parking on the backside of the lot here. We recommend approval with the conditions shown on the plat. This one is a fast track, and so this one is a public hearing as well, but we'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Brooks before we open her? Seeing none, open the public hearing. Anybody in the audience would like to step up and address item 3-4, do so at this time. Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission. Mr. Matichek.
How much of the park's going to be gone? That's not a very big park to start with. It's a nice little park.
No, so the 43 by 30 feet on the backside, and I should mention, with that thought in mind, there is no parking for that park, so as part of this agreement, the parking that he's providing will actually be available as well for people that want to go to the park. So that's part of the negotiation that happened between the park district and the property owner.
Will there be signage explaining that so we don't get in a situation where we're towing people?
Yeah, maybe I'll go to the air photo because kind of harder to understand.
I know how the get down parking is a premium, and then you start.
He gets mad because everybody's parking there and all of
Yeah.
a sudden starts towing people.
Mr. Matichek?
One other question. Is the access going to be just off of 5th?
That's right. So
No
hopefully,
access off Gateway, right?
hopefully you can see that as well, Jamie. So yeah, here's Gateway Drive. Here's the current parking. So the piece that's being extended is the parking piece here. We're very careful, and we'll deal with, we've already had a conversation with the owner as well, is making sure that the entrance to where this parking will be, they'll still have to come in off of Gateway Drive, but then come on around, and it'll just be an extension of the parking here. Now, I haven't talked to them about signage that says, you know, that this is limited at all. It's still going to be controlled locally. I don't know who else would be using that parking. You know, Dairy Queen seems to be short on parking a lot, but I don't think anybody's going to park over here to then cross over into this area.
There's no access on Fifth then? From
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And the piece is back here, Frank, too, that they're purchasing, so it is off that backside, so.
I mean, I just never say never, because if you pull up your car there and you just go get a Dairy Queen and go sit in the park, I mean, it makes all sense in the world to me too, but
Yeah,
I
and
just
as
want to
long-
be careful here because I just see these, I just thought about it.
As long as the office isn't open, I don't think he's gonna go enforce anything or really care for the most part, but, and I think for as often as people would do that, those two stalls are gonna be, you know, from his perspective, he's getting a couple more stalls, which is what, this office piece is looking to do. And if you haven't seen the improvements that they made there, that was the old, I think, Dick King office building. They've really made it look good. I know Terry Anderson did a great job there, and it really looks good. And it's kind of that revitalization of North End that we've been trying to get at, and they're just trying to get a little bit more parking, so.
No park features will have to be relocated in the park?
That's correct.
Perfect.
I do have a motion
Second.
and a second. Miss Sandy made the motion, if you didn't hear her down there, and Mr. Reichert made the second, okay? Any further discussion on this one? We're good, seeing nothing, call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Now we're on to communications and preliminaries.
Item 4-1, ordinance to amend zoning map, rezone to B3 General Business District, Lots 6, 7, and 8, Block 59, and Lots 6 through 12, Block B. Alexander and Ives Addition, located at 702 and 624 North Washington Street and 1215 and 1211 South 7th Avenue North.
Mr. Brooks?
I get the North End items. So the next item is up on North Washington Street in the 700 block. This is the, I'll zoom in a little bit. This is 702, which is the original request. This building's been up for sale. There's somebody who's interested. It's the old Forsberg Motors, I believe. I think Cliff Koss has owned it now for a bit, I believe is the current owner. Yeah, Cliff Koss. And the new owner wanted to do car repairs in there. It's really set up well for that, and perhaps was even being done a little bit in the past in that site, but it's a B1, which doesn't allow for car repair on that site. So the new owner's just trying to do this the right way. He came in, asked about zoning, wants to get it rezoned before he purchases it. The potential buyer is here. At the same token, I kind of looked across the street. I saw the Listen Center. I know they're building a new spot down in further south on Washington, but I noticed that theirs was a B1 site, and I did contact them, and they were interested in being included as well. And I thought that had a little bit bigger area then of B3 as well in our B1 area here. And Listen doesn't have any plans right now, but they are potentially going to sell in the future, so they thought that might be good to have more options available with a potential buyer in the future, being B1, and their site, quite frankly, would be pretty limited on what they could do on that site, being B1, which is our limited business versus a general business district. Being along North Washington, it is a high visibility corridor. We just thought there'd be potential for some improvements and some amenities there for folks on the north end. So with that, we were recommending approval, and I'll stand for any questions. And the applicant, he is in the audience as well, that made the original request.
Mr. Butke?
Yeah, so I have a question not so much about the 702, but on south of 7th Avenue there. So
Yep.
Wouldn't this make 1211, which looks to be like a single family type structure, wouldn't that make this non-conforming?
So that would be the case. They're currently, I don't know if their thoughts were to keep that, I don't know the condition of the house, but they did say that they wanted that included. I don't know if they saw that as, currently it's a rental that they have, and that they were looking to, I don't know what the condition was, but it sounded like they were looking to have that included in on that rezoning request. The Listen Center. So they own, Listen Center owns that site. These 3 parcels are all owned by the Listen Center. And if I can zoom in a little bit more, you can kind of see how the sidewalk is connecting across and included into this playground area. So they're really wrapped in with that. I mean, I know what you're saying in terms of the concern about losing some of those, but I think that was at least what we looked at, so.
I guess that's sort of one concern I had about including these south 3 lots in this request. The north lot doesn't do anything for me, but the 3 south ones, yeah, I guess I'm thinking about a non-conforming use, which like we're concerned about all the time. I'm also concerned about an overparked situation, right? Like if this is indeed redeveloped at some point, right? If they do sell and move, then whoever buys that is going to be obligated, I assume, to go to the commercial parking requirements, right, in our code. So I'm getting at, I fear that we could be in a situation here where we're knocking down a perfectly good residence in a residential neighborhood to build parking lots.
Yeah, and we could certainly pull that one off and make that part of whatever the redevelopment is in the future. But that was at least their current request, so.
And then I had, sorry if I may, one other thing about just the B3 generally. I think it was last month we talked quite at length about a tattoo parlor, right? Like we were talking about in a similar context, not very far away from here, where you had a residential sort of feel in the neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, if you allow those uses that are allowed as B3, well, that could include a tattoo parlor, which
correct.
I don't think is a big deal, but like, it's the same. How is it different? Like, I'm not understanding why we're so reluctant in one instance that a B3 use might be bad, but like here, we'll just toss it in.
Well, from my perspective, if this whole site develops as B3, we're on Washington Street. So to me, that does feel different. I think there is a tattoo parlor south of here, if I'm not mistaken, in another spot. But being along the corridor, I think that does provide a different feel than the other spot that we were talking about last time, mm-hmm. Which was going to be residentials on each side of that commercial spot. And we had an owner that was reluctant, a neighbor that mm-hmm. was reluctant. So in this case, we haven't got to the neighbors yet. I haven't contacted anybody else. I've only done one in this case. So, but we can certainly pull off the 1211. And then I can check with Listen to find out if they want to pull the rest and just hold them. This was me just trying to be proactive in terms of making the area a little bit bigger. So, but yeah, there's a longer list of B3s that would be eligible here. My reluctance, I don't see this as the same as that other spot, but I see that as more because of the North Washington frontage. I don't think of it as 7th Avenue North frontage, for sure for these two. But as you get to the east here, yeah, you're right, that would maybe get more into that neighborhood. So we could certainly ask for that one, or the motion could be amended to pull that one off for now.
Mr. Aker?
Could we, it struck me the last few times that we've had some opportunities here could we use a micro PUD here to include, maybe not, if there's a few B3 uses that we're afraid of that we want to take out, and then include an R2 use or something? I mean, could we do something like that with a micro PUD here?
We could, I think when I talked to Listen, at least on this, this particular site, it didn't sound like that they were long for having that site there, but I can certainly do some more due diligence and have more discussion with them and either bring that back at final, or if you guys just wanted to pull it off at this point and then add it back on.
I mean, because you know, that building, I can't remember exactly what it's like, but if they wanted to turn it into, instead of some business, if they wanted to turn it into a multifamily situation or do some of that in there, I mean, we don't have anything in the code right now that lets you do business and or residential really, so it might be a nice experiment to do both in one micro PUD here.
You certainly could, but at that point then, I think we'd want to see what really their design was to go to a micro PUD, like, show me what your design is and how you would incorporate those in. And then maybe it would be, okay, who's your final seller, and then get into that is probably where I'd be looking at with the micro PUD, just because then we could really see what those uses are and what that mix would be, on how you would incorporate in the, you know, that duplex or residential piece on the east side with the rest, so.
Because otherwise, but we don't have a way to make this conforming then, do we, if we don't?
Well, the micro PUD is the route, so you are correct there. It just usually wanted to be a little bit more refined with that in terms of how those would go together. I was just trying to be proactive on this one, but maybe that just didn't work in this case.
No, I like the way you're thinking. I
Oh.
mean, I think, I'm 100% in support of what you're thinking, and
Okay.
but I want to just make it, I want to give them what they want in both senses, but then take a little bit back if there's a couple uses that maybe we don't want to let them have. Let them have the world to sell it to make it more expansive to potential buyers. But then if there's maybe a few things that that you would be less comfortable with having there, get the best of both worlds there. Maybe just something to think about.
Yeah, this would be the time to do that if we were going to convert to a micro PUD, and what uses maybe you guys would maybe want to pull back would be the part that we would do at this point. And I don't know if I'd necessarily have an issue with the tattoo parlor here, though. Or maybe some other options.
I would just say things that are
I shouldn't be using that as an
I
example
would just say
anymore,
maybe
but-
things that are loud, because you do
Yeah.
have some
Bar.
residential area around there.
Yeah, we'd still have the opportunity in this case, you know, bars or those types of things always have to go through another alcohol licensing piece, and we find out distance from a lot of things. And
I would have we had, do we have a motion here?
No.
I would move,
We got,
To make a comment.
yeah, go
yeah, we
ahead.
got a couple more hands up here. Megan?
So are we jumping the gun here a little bit? Because really the request was just for
Yeah,
the cost property. And although I could be open to whatever would happen on the Listen Center, maybe we should know who might be interested in buying that before we go and make any changes for them to have to come back.
we could certainly pull them off for now, and,
Again.
yep.
Or if we do want to make that B3, I would agree at this point with Andrew about taking off that 1211.
We could
But
certainly do
I
that.
just wonder if maybe first we should see who's interested in buying that, because maybe it's somebody who wants to do multifamily, maybe it's somebody who wants to do something business, and then we're just making a change, and they can do that before they buy it, whoever it is.
Yeah, they could make it conditional, just like Mr. Johnson's doing in this case.
I mean, I guess myself, I would prefer, although I appreciate that you were trying to just lump this in and get it taken care of, because something will likely have to be done with that.
Mhm.
But I wonder if we shouldn't wait to see.
And it might be good for the Listen Center to know that you guys would be open to that potential in the future.
Right.
And having this B3 across the street may allow for some flexibility piece, and maybe it's a micro PUD.
And it may give him a better opportunity to sell it if you don't make a change to it now and let
Sure.
this person bring forward.
Yeah, we can hold that.
There's no rush on this.
Mr. Matichek?
Kind of on that same thought, I don't want to hold up 702, so I
Yeah.
think we should go ahead with that. I think there's some good, there's 3 lots here, it's a pretty big area. And I'm not sure, I'm not going to speak for the Listen Drop-In Center, but they're building a new building. I assume they're going to maybe want to do something here. And the more options they would have, I think would be better for them. So I would make a motion to go ahead with 702 and for the moment, hold back on 624, 1215, and 1211. And maybe somebody will put together something.
Okay,
That would
that
be my
sounds good.
motion.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Ms. Sander, Mr. Butke, either way. Simultaneous second. So we've got a motion and a second. I agree with what you guys are doing. It's following right along. So I think we'll call for a vote unless I see any hands. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Unanimous, okay. Thank you, guys. 4-2.
Item 4-2, approval of ordinance to annex Lot 4, Block 4, Sunny Nodak Farms Edition, located 1100 block of North 62nd Street.
Mr. Brooks.
We're going to be talking about this lot that's out here. It's on Gateway Drive in North 62nd. Here's Bible Baptist, I believe, out here. And here's the West Walmart, just for kind of landmines for you guys to kind of see where we're at. Landmarks, I should say. So North 62nd's out here. It's outside of city limits. But it's really close. So what we've looked at and what's being proposed is annexation of 2.74 acres that come down. I think the hard copy was on your desks, but Jamie, I'm going to kind of describe it for you. It comes down North 62nd and then incorporates in this lot here. The city engineering's already working on potentially looking at bringing water down there. The gentleman that wants to build here is a contractor's shop. We're probably going to have a CUP before us next month. And he bought this lot and really just trying to build on it as a contractor. And we've kind of let him know outside the city limits, right next to the city, even though it just seemed like it was inside city limits. It's just south of Don's ABC. That it needed to be annexed. So that's kind of where we're at with him. He understood. Here's our new lift station that we put out here. Engineering kind of was in ahead of the game, and I think they actually dropped the lead for this potential lot. And so some of the things are kind of set up and fitting into place, but do the annexation, we'll kind of look at the rest later on in terms of some of these other existing spots that are out there. So with that, we're recommending approval of the annexation.
Any questions, comments? Miss Sandy?
So it says here that you considered annexing some other property.
Yeah, so,
Which property were you also considering that?
along North 62nd here, so Don's ABC here, the crematorium, there may be we thought that there was maybe a plan to annex them at one point, and then maybe New Vision. At some point, there has been folks interested too in this lot, a bigger piece there. So all of that would, as we start to annex, we start to end up with people that are on islands out there in the future.
Yeah.
The reason we don't grab those now, what happens is that would make it a longer annexation process, so then that affects when he can build. So we kind of looking at annexing now and then having those discussions with those property owners, which quite frankly haven't been done yet. So we'd have to talk with
when
them.
does he plan to build? Did you say that already?
He's looking for this summer.
Oh, he is.
Yep.
Because I hate to see those islands, because it's really hard to go back.
Yeah, and
Annex.
even holding this back doesn't necessarily help it.
Okay.
Doesn't give you any more ammunition. The only way that happens is if it's only 25% or less, then they don't have a say. We always want to be careful with that too, because we try to be as nice as we can when we go forward too. But in this case, he's looking to build. We didn't want to get in his way. He understood the annexation piece. He doesn't also, at the same token, want to build something and then, be 5 years into a septic system that's built for 30 plus years that then he has to replace and then hop onto city sewer.
Who gets
And-
assessed then for this?
He'll get assessed for his portion. The rest still to be determined, but probably a future special assessment, something like
For
that.
when those properties are annexed, or are
Yeah.
they going to be able to?
They don't get missed.
Oh.
I
He's
won't
not
go
paying
in.
for them.
His
He's not paying for them.
No, he
The
pays for
taxpayers
his
aren't
portion.
paying for them, so they'll eventually,
They will,
Part-
right now, there's future special assessments for flood protection.
Sure.
On those properties
Okay.
that are sitting out there, yep. And then water and sewer, and as those things start to, the street will have to get improved.
okay.
I won't go into all those iterations, but those things, the city does have mechanisms for how that gets done, and future special assessments, one, tapping is another. I won't get into all the differences on that, but.
Okay. Thanks.
I would say a preliminary approval, approve this and go have your visits with those people.
2 and 9, yeah, the crematorium.
I think Andrew.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Budke?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up like the sewer, right, and the street. So I'm curious because I've asked in a different context before, has the city done like a return on investment type analysis for that?
For this
infrastructure?
individual?
Right.
So all of the water that gets brought down to this site, we will carry until the annexation, so there will be a carrying cost to the city, but otherwise, all those costs get assessed out to each side, including some engineering fees and
The
other
first cost.
pieces. Yeah, for the initial, and then the taxes get paid for through, and that'll cover the maintenance and those types of things. I don't know how individually this area, we haven't tried to come down to what exactly that amount will be, because we don't even know what the value will be of the property once it's fully developed.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. I did have another question. So there's this worksheet in here, the annexation rating system.
Correct, yep.
Is that going to be reevaluated at all as part of the
Yep.
land use plan?
Yep.
Okay.
That's one of the items that I think we have them on. Yeah, at the end, we are having them look at that annexation point system, and that's a complete city cost, if I remember right. That's one of the items that we have them looking at, the SRF, the consultant.
Okay, that's great, because, I've seen a few of these, and every time I'm just struck at, it seems like nonsensical to me, that there's, it just requires 12 points, but the way things are ranked, I mean, you can get 12 points if you have 80% contiguous border, and you're in the Tier 1 designation in the land use plan, and that's all it takes. I don't think that's enough, so I'll just add that comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Careful on the annexation thing, we'll have a room full next winter. Right, Frank? Where we live.
One thing on that, if you went for this large of an annexation, your percentage would be able to kick it out, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There'd be no way you'd get it.
Well, no, I
It's
shouldn't.
almost better to go, as people want to get annexed, it's friendlier, it comes about easier, and, if you went for a big mass annexation, like he said, there wouldn't be enough room in this room.
There wouldn't be, but if it yeah.
But you got a lot of different owners here.
In some cases, that still maybe makes the most sense for us to, in some cases, if you have, there may be some folks that we would have to have a discussion at least on what those costs would be. And then you kind of get into some analysis, maybe not to the degree that everybody thinks is satisfactory, but we do get into a degree of looking at that. And even if you're over 25% of the people that are protesting, that doesn't mean it stops, it just goes to a resolution.
Right.
Which then is a different process, and it does take a longer time. Yes, so much, yeah, it takes a lot more time. And there is always that context of, yes, it would be great if everybody was in agreement, but I know that that's not always going to be the case either, so.
Are
least you
there
get-
multiple property owners of the vacant lot out here, or is that,
On this side? Oops, sorry.
well, the Sunny,
Yeah, the Sunny, Nodak, once you get south of here, yeah, they're all under the same LLC.
so then that wouldn't be a difficult annexation of that.
No, but we're not ready to serve these. When we come down, we'll come down to here with our water. We weren't looking to go beyond that to serve these other properties here that are in this area yet. because I don't think they're ripe for development yet. Yeah, if they were requested, I guess we'd have to see if that matched, but there would have to, I know getting down to this area is going to be a challenge this year. Purchasing these, I would tell somebody, tell me you're not wanting anything for a year and a half, probably, and I don't know what else take is on that, but
So then this isn't the time to do that, I mean, those are being, it's been added.
to do these ones here,
Yeah.
no, I think we start with where we're bringing in utilities next to it, is typically what we do. Because then that's the point that there's cost then to the city as well, and then that's when we pick up those neighboring parcels to that
It might be a
utility.
good time to have a conversation with those owners who are already out there in buildings and whatnot,
Yeah,
Like
and I
you said,
think
if you're
these-
bringing it down at that time anyway, you might want to talk and drop the sewer, and if that's up to them, I'll stay out of that. But yeah, it'd be a good time to talk to them.
These may be for sale too, they might be on the MLS now, yeah.
Okay, looking for a motion on this one, if anybody's out of questions. Mr. Reichert?
I'll move approval of the hockey stick annexation.
Very well put, Mr. Reichert.
Second.
Second by Ms. Sandy. Any further discussion? Seeing no hands, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Bucky opposed. Okay, thank you, everybody. So, reports from planning department?
We do have one. We have a couple folks here that are going to do a presentation on the fair housing presentation. I've worked with Michelle Ridds, who wasn't able to make it tonight, but there are a couple folks here going to make I've asked them to do about a 15-minute presentation on the fair housing, and with that, I know Ms. Jackson. Okay.
I'm your substitute.
Okay, all right. We'll let them make their presentation.
All right, thank you so much for having us here today. I'm Angela Erlacher. I'm with High Plains Fair Housing Center, and I'm here with Margaret Jackson, who's a law professor at UND and one of the co-founders of High Plains Fair Housing Center. So I'm just going to introduce real quick what High Plains does, and then Margaret will go into how fair housing intersects with zoning. So High Plains Fair Housing Center is a statewide nonprofit civil rights organization with the mission to eradicate housing discrimination across North Dakota. And we do a number of things to work to eradicate housing discrimination. We do a lot of education and outreach to the community. We help people who are facing housing discrimination. We help them mediate with landlords. In certain cases, we help them file complaints, and we do help people file lawsuits as well. So in a nutshell, we work to enforce the Fair Housing Act, which is a piece of legislation from the 1968 Civil Rights Act. And in that, in the Fair Housing Act, it is illegal to discriminate in housing transactions on the basis of certain protected classes. So it's illegal to treat people differently or discriminate on the basis of someone's race, on the basis of the color of their skin, or their national origin, their religion, their gender, and this does now include gender identity and sexual orientation. It also includes not discriminating against people for having minor children in the home, so you can't treat children differently under the law, and people with disabilities as well. In North Dakota, we also have some more protections, so you can't treat people differently because they receive public assistance, or because of their age, or their marital status. And the Fair Housing Act is written to be really, really broad. Any kind of housing transaction is covered under the Fair Housing Act. So this includes rentals, buying and selling homes, lending, so mortgages and home equity loans. It includes insurance, and it also includes zoning. So I'm going to pass it over to Margaret to talk about the intersection of fair housing and zoning.
Before you leave, I'd just like to put it in the minutes that we congratulate your son on breaking the state pole vault record.
Thank Thank you.
If we could put that in the minutes, please.
Then we get to talk about Red River Baseball as well.
When their coach comes, yes.
Nice job.
Hi, everyone. Let me see if I have the right glasses. Thank you for having us here today. Thank you for the work that you do, which I find kind of fascinating, but also realize that I would have a lot to learn more about how we do these things in this city. That having been said, I'm here to give you some broad overview of exactly what Angie was talking about, how the Fair Housing Act and the substantially equivalent state laws govern what it is you guys are involved in. So as Angie talked about, we're talking about a really broadly applicable federal law, which means that it applies in lots of situations where you might not imagine that it does, and also it's mirrored by corresponding state law, and it applies to everyone. The prohibition against discrimination, as I'll explain, it applies to individuals, it applies to private businesses, and it applies to governmental entities, like a city or a county or a zoning commission. These state and federal laws enable anyone who's aggrieved by a violation of the law to sue these individuals, private entities, or governmental bodies for damages, for other kinds of relief, and so forth. And both HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Justice are entrusted with enforcing this law. It's important, I say that, it's important to know that what we're talking about are laws. They're not guidelines, they're not regulations. It's a long-standing law against discrimination that encourages claims to be brought as really the primary method of enforcing the law. So how does fair housing shape the work of planning and zoning? You're probably thinking, what does this have to do with us? We don't rent out apartments and we're not the housing authority. But again, fair housing laws apply much more broadly than you might assume. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in any building intended for occupancy as a residence and in any vacant land offered for sale or lease for the construction of any kind of building where people will occupy. So decisions related to the development or use of such land must comply with the state and federal fair housing laws. So let's look at really the four main ways in which a claim can be made that the Fair Housing Act has been violated. So first would be what you're probably thinking of, intentional discrimination based on membership in one of the protected classes, or sometimes claims can be brought against situations where more than one of the protected classes has been implicated with intentional discrimination, treating people differently because of their membership in this class. So this is familiar. We used to see zoning ordinances that restricted folks from buying or renting or living in particular areas based on their race or based on their ethnicity. And once the courts ruled that this was illegal, that's when cities started implementing single-family zoning and other types of ordinances that tended to have the same effect, even though they weren't explicitly racially restrictive. When it all boiled down, a lot of times, what they were doing was having the same effect. And so that's one of the reasons why the law also forbids unintentional discrimination when it affects folks in one of these protected categories, race or color or disability, and the other ones that were mentioned, and has a much more negative impact on those folks because of the category they're in, without sufficient justification. So it's a little complicated. It's not like immediately if there's an unintentional discrimination and it affects people disproportionately, boom, you're liable. It's not that simple, and I don't have time to talk all about it, but without substantial justification is kind of the way we talk about it. So there is a place for a zoning board or a city or what have you to say, we had to do it this way. There's no other way to accomplish our legitimate goals, and the fact that it disproportionately affects people because of insert category is justified. Then there's the discriminatory effect can also be established, and a violation of the law established, by showing that an action, such as a zoning decision, while facially neutral, nowhere in the resolution does it say anything about race or disability or those other categories, but it affects the community generally by perpetuating segregation, right? By making it so that even more so than where we are right now, and we all know that because of things that happened in the past and that are sometimes still happening, we do have some residential segregation. So we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to make decisions that further perpetuate segregation. So the law provides for a claim when that's done, and again, without sufficient justification, right? So if there's a good reason for what it is the decision is, even though it perpetuates segregation, a justification could be made. So this can be of any class when we talk about segregation, further entrenching racial segregation, or segregation based on national origin, or segregation of people with disabilities. And the courts have recognized that this type of segregation harms communities as a whole. And the last type of kind of main categories of where this law comes into play that might not surprise you at all is the failure to reasonably accommodate. So the Fair Housing Act requires municipalities and local governments to make reasonable accommodations to zoning and land use rules, policies, practices, and procedures as necessary to provide individuals with disabilities equal housing access. So a reasonable accommodation request is very fact-centric, and no two are really going to be alike. And so what it behooves a board, a zoning commission, or any type of government entity who's asked to make a special exception, a waiver, a change in a given situation that involves people with disabilities who need that change to have what turns out to be equal access to housing opportunity, to make that, if it's reasonable, right? So that takes some analysis of the facts. Reasonable accommodations involve someone requesting flexibility from the local government in how land use and planning or zoning restrictions are applied, and in some instances, even a waiver can be reasonable, a waiver of certain restrictions or requirements when people with disabilities need it. So what are some of the most common issues that arise where planning and zoning kind of goes off the rails? Most of the Fair Housing Act suits against local governments have involved challenges to exclusionary zoning or other types of land use decisions. So there's abundant case law, right? If you encounter a situation and you're wondering, are we in a danger zone here? Do we need to look carefully at our potential legal liability if we make a misstep? There's lots of cases to guide your lawyer in answering that question for you. So I've divided them into three kinds: exclusionary zoning, perpetuating segregation, and denying requests for reasonable accommodation. Exclusionary zoning, I didn't really say what that was about, but it's keeping people out, right? Zoning, when local governments use their zoning or other land use powers to block housing projects that are likely to include racial minorities or other classes protected by the Fair Housing Act. Many suits, the way that these often turn out to be brought, challenging these exclusionary zoning practices have been brought by developers, companies that want to build housing because they think they can make a profit of it, or owners of land who have an idea of something they think they can generate income with, and they're not allowed. Or the prospective tenants could be plaintiffs, and so forth. A municipal defendant in a typical exclusionary zoning case is sued because it has blocked these efforts in the community, not because it's discriminated as a housing provider in the operation of its own buildings. So sometimes these can be because of discriminatory intent, the really clear instance of discrimination. And And sometimes it can be based on a disproportionate impact on a class protected by the Fair Housing Act, or again, perpetuating segregation without substantial justification. So an example of a land use practice that violates the Fair Housing Act under a discriminatory effects standard might include a minimum floor space or lot size requirements that really increase the size and cost of housing if such an increase has the effect of excluding persons from a locality or from a neighborhood because of their membership in a protected class without legally sufficient justification. And these exclusionary zoning complaints, if they do happen to get filed with HUD, they can be brought straight to court, or they can be filed with HUD, but HUD will move them on to the Department of Justice if they believe there's cause. And then some examples of the decisions that perpetuate segregation, those, contrary to the exclusionary zoning, which keep people out, perpetuating segregation concentrates people of certain categories in certain areas. So it has a discriminatory effect if it creates, increases, reinforces, or perpetuates segregated housing patterns because of a protected characteristic. Again, the government has the opportunity to show the practice is necessary for a legitimate reason, but these have to be based in evidence and fact. They can't be based on speculation or stereotypes. So one thing to guide you as you think about this a little bit more, because I don't have enough time to really talk a lot, but if fair housing objectives are to be achieved, the goal to have in mind is to avoid high concentrations of low-income housing and to approve housing developments or changes that will promote integration. Not to deny the housing without careful consideration of the need that our city might have for new integrated housing opportunities in the vicinity of the developer's proposed project. So when these things come before you, to be thinking about these aspects. And then lastly, a few examples of refusing to approve a request for reasonable accommodation of persons with disabilities, not being flexible, right? Just looking at the rules and saying, oh, that violates that's not how we do it, or that's not how the rule works, or this isn't what we're allowed to do on paper. A reasonable accommodation request, by definition, is a request to be flexible, to deviate from the rule, because people with disabilities sometimes need something a little different to deal with their individual disabilities. So denying a request to modify setback requirements so an accessible sidewalk or ramp can be provided for persons with a mobility impairment might be an example of failing to reasonably accommodate. Or refusing to waive an ordinance that limits the number of unrelated persons who may live in a single-family home, where such waiver may be necessary for persons with disabilities to have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. I have other examples which I'll just touch on briefly so you'll have them in mind. And what I was thinking of actually is just offering, not knowing what you might want to know more about. I can come back at some other time or meet with you at some other way to give you information that might be pertinent to what you're thinking about. But giving into NIMBYism can be a problem. Whether persons to be served with housing are families with children, or persons with disabilities, or homeless persons, or lower income folks, many communities feel strongly that the housing should be provided, but not in my backyard. And this attitude seriously affects housing availability for people in our communities. It's a difficult challenge, and it's often fueled by discriminatory stereotypes or fears that are not based in real fact or data. So when applying zoning or land use laws, it's important not to act in response to those fears or to acquiesce to those fears or unsubstantiated assumptions that community members may have. Because denying zoning approval for example, a low-income housing development that meets all the zoning and land use requirements, but denying it because the development may have may house residents of a particular protected class or classes whose presence the community fears can be an example of intentional discrimination, like a clear violation of the act, even if the folks on the zoning commission aren't acting with bias, right? You're not the ones who have this fear, but if you act in acquiescence to that type of NIMBYism, it can be a problem and a violation. Similarly, rejecting a proposal for multifamily housing where it's permitted under the code, but the neighbors are against it, this could be a problem or a violation. Blocking a group home or denying a request for reasonable accommodation in response to neighbors' stereotypical fears or prejudices about people with disabilities violates the act. There are some other issues that I believe you're intending to work on that were identified in another report, the analysis of impediments to fair housing, like ordinances that define a family as persons related by blood or marriage and then restrict the number of non-related persons who can live together can have an obvious impact on persons with disabilities who maybe have to live in group homes or want to live in group homes, and that's a less restrictive environment for them. Those probably need to be looked at if that's what we have here. And I'm sure you can find examples of how to do it that addresses legitimate concerns without unnecessary discrimination or perpetuating segregation. Also, ordinances that explicitly limit the number of people in a particular protected category, like saying that something about developmentally disabled adults can only be a certain number in certain places. That's pretty explicit, and I didn't search the case law or anything, but that's something that I found is explicit restrictions that name a category are pretty much intentional discrimination that needs to be fixed if that's what we have. And also land use regulations like large minimum lot requirements and multifamily zoning may restrict lower income families and families of color from moving into certain neighborhoods, and they limit affordability and the number of rental multifamily housing opportunities overall. So those could be also something to consider in light of fair housing law and goals. Real quick, moving forward, a lot of the papers I've been reading talk about the missing middle in housing, right? And we need to think about the young people, singles. A lot of people live alone, whether they're young or whether they're seniors, needing housing options that are kind of in the middle. They're not necessarily part of the apartment landscape that I see when I look south and sometimes west, and they're not necessarily huge mansions or anything, but folks that would like to live in a duplex, a nice triplex, families that are just starting out. This missing middle, lots of communities are dealing with this. Minneapolis, for example, had set aside 70% of its residential land for single-family homes, which is really common. It's usually 70 or 75%. In 2019, they completely eliminated single-family zoning policies citywide, right? And that doesn't mean that you can build an apartment on every lot. It means they said duplexes and triplexes. If an owner or a buyer or developer wants to, get one of these lots and develop it into a duplex or a triplex, now they're not forbidden from doing so. And this has been happening in other places. Yes, some are in California, but also states like Montana and Maryland and Nebraska, Vermont, Virginia are all looking at how do we fill in the housing opportunity, the housing need that our communities have, and further the goals of strong communities and fair housing overall. So I'll stop there. Oh, but before I do, I have brought with me a single copy of a really informative document that's put out jointly by HUD and the Department of Justice. It's a 2016 joint statement of the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the DOJ on state and local land use laws and practices and the application of the Fair Housing Act. It has a nice question and answer format. I can leave this with Mr. Brooks, who probably has a copy in his office, but maybe some of you folks would like to take a look at it, and thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you for your time. Okay, moving along.
Before we move on, do you have any questions for Ms. Gadsden?
No.
Just real quick, just wanted to ask before she steps away, this is a great opportunity for the commission to ask any questions, clarifying. Do you have any that you would like to discuss with her?
I don't see any hands. Thank you for your time.
And again, I'd be glad to come back at some other date.
Well, I think hopefully we're getting with Michelle too, and we're hoping with North Dakota Planning Association, maybe actually making a session with that. So I don't know if that's been passed along, but North Dakota Planning Association has been doing some trainings that be set up for maybe like an hour. We've done a couple of those, and then looking to do some of those in the future, and they'd be a really good topic for that across the whole state. I think planners across the state have kind of looked at having that, so.
Mr. Budke?
I do have a question. Has the city ever, sorry, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, but like, done a comparison of like maybe where some of these protected populations are residing and checked that against the current zoning map and seeing if there are concentrations? Is there a way of measuring that?
Yeah, if you know.
As part of the CDBG program and everything that operates that our community development department side of our department, it kind of focuses more on, they do produce a low to moderate income map that addresses minority concentrations. And so that's one protected class that we can identify easily because we map it and HUD maps it through census tracts. And I don't know about the rest of the protected classes if they're mapped or not, but I do know our department, I know where that map is. We haven't compared that to the zoning map per se, but you can identify the concentrations based on census tract.
And that's typically what I was going to say. The MPO does a lot of that, so we've put together a lot of those maps, and then, but it has changed. So it hasn't been just one area. In the next census, we have had some movement, and it does, we have noticed that it depends on what you measure, what is a concentrated amount. So I think the MPOs is 3 times the average, I believe is what they use. That may not be the right standard, but that's what they use. I want to say, and I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, but that is something that, I guess that's kind of something that you're always having to track because you're getting new information with each census and have those moved and why, and then have that matched in with, does it make sense? Do we need to look at other areas? So it is something that HUD does require of us and to take a look at, and community development side often is working on that, and that's one of the benefits to having community development and planning together in our office now.
So sorry, you said it's been looked at, but I thought you also said that it hadn't been cross-checked, right? The zoning map and this
We
other.
look at it based on the federal funding aspect with community development block grants and handing those federal dollars. The MPO looks at it because the federal transit dollars that come through the MPO. And so by federal guidelines, we have to evaluate those and serve low to moderate income as well as minority classes. We have to make sure we're providing services with those federal dollars to those directly because that's what the dollars are directed towards.
Right.
But to your point of, so we address that on the funding side, the federal funding side in those programs. I don't know that we've yet made the correlation between that and zoning, which is where Ms. Jackson's kind of background may be helpful for future discussions.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about like what the effect is, right? Because, I mean, as was pointed out, that it doesn't take animus, right, to like perpetuate a harmful pattern, right? So like, I'm curious if anybody's like checked that, right? Like tried to quantify that.
Not with the zoning. I don't think we've done it with overlaid the zoning and taking a look. We know where some of the zonings are in those, some of the areas that we had concentrations, but usually it popped up around downtown, potentially north, and then UND, I think, was the other concentration typically in the past.
Yeah, and Andy in our office on the community development side, and Colin Hansen has started to kind of take the lead in helping educate staff on some of these different things. And we know there's a higher issue with maybe income discrimination, more so than some of the other protected classes. Not to say that those don't happen and occur, but the more prevalent in our community probably is income. And so to evaluate that and that impact with zoning, like Ms. Jackson said, minimum lot sizes, multifamily, things of that nature, there's probably lessons we could learn from that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other business?
We'll send it, we'll scan this and then send it out to you guys.
Appreciate that. Okay, with that, we want to make a motion to adjourn this thing?
Move to adjourn if you really want to go to your party.
No party, just one wife who needs it. All right. Motion and second, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. My 20-year anniversary tonight.
I know, I heard that.
I know.